First, though, the executive has spent the afternoon charting a course through the economic desert that seems to stretch out endlessly before us all. The Finance Minister, Nigel Dodds, is with me. Minister, good evening to you. Now, good news has come out of the meeting. We have the new rail or the transit track, and we have the signature project of the Titanic. But these were projects which were already well in hand, had been sitting there for a long time. What have you got to tell us about a new strategy for charting a way out of our troubles?
Well, it's very important to make the point that these are being rolled out under the investment strategy for Northern Ireland, which was a strategy which was new to the executive. And that means over £1.5 billion of expenditure on major capital projects this year, and a very considerable sum next year, the year after. So over the 3-year period of the budget, over £5 billion. Now, that is the executive's doing. That investment strategy is the executive's. And the Titanic signature project, for instance, which should create 600 jobs, that will get underway almost immediately. And under the new streamlined planning process, that has come through planning very, very quickly. I was down at the headquarters the other day, and the new public record office, which has been started again, went through planning very quickly. And so there are things being done. And the new planning, PPS 21, which was agreed, again has corrected the faults of the direct rule planning, PPS 14, and that has now hopefully unblocked the logjam as far as that's concerned.
But in October, the construction industry was telling us they'd lost 8,000 jobs already, more to come. So 600 or so on the Titanic is not going to make a big dent in that hole.
Well, no, that's right. And the issue of the construction sector is very, very serious indeed. Right across the UK, the Republic, everywhere, the construction industry has been hit particularly hard. There's no doubt about that. And I meet with the Construction Employers Federation and others in industry, and this is the very grim news that's out there. One of the things we should say that as a result of the executive's investment strategy on building infrastructure projects, roads, hospitals, schools and so on, which are for the benefit of the entire community moving forward, but which gives great support to the construction industry, what needs to be borne in mind is this, that 4 years ago we were spending some £670 million a year on that type of project. This year it will be more than doubled. So whilst things are difficult, the fact that 40% of all the construction industry's output is in the public sector, far greater than other parts of the United Kingdom, does provide greater help and support to the construction industry than other regions. Now, I want to try and see if we can do more by trying to bring forward some projects, and we got some help in that regard with our discussions with the Treasury and as a result of the pre-budget report.
All right, so when can we see a strategy from the executive on this, on the recession?
Well, what we had today was a very good discussion, again, about a number of very important issues right across the board from all departments, putting forward ideas and proposals. And I would hope, as Finance Minister, to come to the Assembly shortly in terms of the in-year position, where departments are saying they can't spend money in this, but can we spend it in other things, and with a number of proposals that will help. Now, we've got to remember, of course, that we're a devolved administration. We're not in the position of a national government. We've seen things that the national government has done, and there are things that we don't have any control over, like the banks. And I mean, in all of this, I think we need to be very, very careful to say that the real problem here is the lack of liquidity, lack of credit, and the banks need to step up to the mark and pass on those interest rate cuts. Is there
anything you can do in that regard? I was talking to an executive in the car industry who was saying that the banks are putting up their lending rates to the industry. Surely you must be able to bring some pressure on the banks to play the game.
Well, I think this is a very important point, and what you're saying is being reflected to me and to others as well, and we're hearing it at Westminster. MPs right across the board are saying banks are being very, very difficult at this time. And I think there's a real danger here for the banks. They have had a considerable bailout, some £37 billion of public money in terms of recapitalisation. Now, the idea of that is to get banks acting like banks, to start to lend again. But we're hearing these very, very grim stories of terms being put forward, very considerable draconian interest rates, terms and conditions which are very difficult. Now, the banks, and I am doing my best with local banks. I know the British government are doing their best with banks at a national level. But if they don't learn the lesson,
so what are you doing? Are you going to the chief executives face to face and telling them they have to move?
We are talking to business, we're talking to construction, we're talking to banking sector all the time in order to try to get this moved forward. And there is a responsibility on the banks. There's a responsibility on the energy companies as well at this time to pass on to consumers the reductions in the price of crude oil and so on. So we need to be very proactive out there engaging with the banks and others to ensure that they do what they can, because government can do what it can, but it's not the entire story here.
On the specific issue of the Presbyterian Mutual Scheme, of course, can you do anything there to help people? I mean, there are people who had savings with Icelandic banks are getting help. Why not Presbyterians?
Yeah. And this is a matter very much for the Treasury in London. And what we have done as an executive is the board of directors of the Presbyterian Mutual came to Arlene Foster, whose responsibility it is for industrial and provident societies, and said, look, we don't have the legislation in place to try to bring in an administrator which would protect the fund in the short term. Can you do something? Within 3 days, that legislation was in place, and it showed the flexibility and rapidity of the response from the executive to a crisis. But in the wider terms, we now have an administrator in place, and it will depend on his discussions with the Financial Services Authority and all of that as to how he takes that forward.
Some 63% of our economy is publicly funded in Northern Ireland. Are you saying to people, don't worry, we're much better off than everyone else, we're not going to go into a recession? Tell that to the employees at MFI and Woolworths and other places, of course.
I think that's absolutely right, and we've heard this grim news about Woolworths and MFI, and it's a bad time for the employees of those firms. And of course we know that even during the good times, firms like Littlewoods and C&A disappear. This happens all the time, and one of the things, at least Northern Ireland again, we need to say is that with the euro rate compared to sterling, we are seeing a massive influx of shoppers actually from the Irish Republic into Northern Ireland, and that's helping to buoy up the retail sector at the moment. But nevertheless, there are serious issues. But on your point, I mean, the executive did make the case, and rightly so, and has been borne out by events, that it was absolutely essential to make growing the economy, growing the private sector a priority, and making sure that Northern Ireland played to its strengths in terms of the skills of its people and its low-cost operating environment. And that has proved to be more important today than it's ever been.
But it hasn't brought a penny in from America from the big conference in May, has it? I mean, we haven't seen a job or a dollar.
I think that's not quite true, Noel. I mean, Arlene Foster was out there following on from the conference, which I had a lot to do with as Deputy Minister at that time, as Economy Minister, and there have been a number of contracts that have been secured. But we always said following that conference that it would be a medium to long-term thing. This is about positioning Northern Ireland so that when things, opportunities arise, that we're right there at the forefront of people's thoughts.
And we've had 5 months of complete inaction, and now the First and Deputy First Ministers are off to America to say how wonderful it all is. Well, who's going to believe them?
You know better than I that I was one of the ones who was most frustrated and angry and disgusted at the fact that we weren't allowed to meet as an executive for 5 months. And I mean, now that we are moving ahead in terms of the executive meeting, it's important to put on record that we must address these issues, that things must move forward. And remember too that in terms of the executive, we have already introduced a freeze on regional rates, which means that over the period of the next 3 years, householders in Northern Ireland will be £1,000 better.
What about the district rate? What can you do there?
If I just finish this point, they will be £1,000 better off than they would otherwise have been under direct rule. We have also introduced a whole lot of reforms to rates. It's going to be free prescriptions, free travel for all senior citizens over 60. And I want to take the opportunity to reassure our senior citizens that there will be absolutely no question of going back on that. That's firm.
What about the district rate? Can you do anything in that, or does that risk affecting public services?
District rates are set by local councils.
I understand that.
And that's really a matter for local councils.
But again, you could influence them.
Well, I mean, again,
I rise plus inflation plus
I will be meeting NILGA, the Northern Ireland Local Government Association, very shortly to talk to them and local councils about issues to do with rates and so on. But we're introducing a lot of rating reforms which are helping people out there, and this applies to district rates and regional rates. For instance, we're saying now to senior citizens living in their own that they can they don't have to pay 20%, or that they only have to pay 20% of their rates. That they can also defer their rates. We're introducing a lot of help for senior citizens and for vulnerable and low-paid people as well.
There's been a lot of talk about Europe this week. Are you thinking of abandoning Westminster and running for Europe?
Well, I'm not thinking of abandoning anything. I take the view in politics that we're in there to fight and to fight our corner.
Would you be interested in the European
Well, as far as the European nomination for the Democratic Unionist Party is concerned, that will be a matter that will be settled by the party.
Would you like it or not?
Well, everybody who wants to be considered for that can put their name forward at the appropriate time.
Will you put your name forward?
Well, I'm not going to get into any speculation who is or who isn't going to engage in that.
Minister, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.